You're making us look bad, Cole. The other production teams are already 2 days ahead of schedule. I didn't look up from the pipe I was examining, one hand resting on its cool metal skin, the other holding an old stethoscope-like listening device to its surface. I was tracing a vibration, a faint, almost imperceptible tremor that didn't belong. It was a song of stress, a hum that told me the system's guts were in trouble. Big trouble. My name's Elijah Cole, but most folks just call me Eli. I'm 52 years old. I've spent the better part of my life in places like this. First in the Army Corps of Engineers, and now as the senior safety engineer for the Oak Creek plant. It's one of Apex Chemicals' biggest facilities, sprawling across the flatlands outside Freeport, Texas. This is the kind of place where a small mistake, a single missed vibration, doesn't just cost a few bucks. It costs everything. It costs you the people you love. Blake Sutton stood there in his pristine, company-logoed polo shirt, arms crossed over his chest, his tablet held loosely in one hand. He was waiting, radiating impatience. He'd been the new plant manager for exactly 3 weeks. He was maybe 38, with an MBA, and the kind of restless energy that came from a career built in boardrooms, not on concrete factory floors. The Houston headquarters sent him down here armed with a new vocabulary for us old-timers: synergy, optimization, data-driven productivity. I'd seen his type come and go a dozen times. They never lasted long. "There's an anomaly in the feed line to reactor 3, I said, my voice flat, still focused on the pipe. "The vibration is off rhythm. We need to power it down and run a full internal diagnostic before the night shift comes on." "For God's sake," Blake scoffed, tapping his tablet. "That'll set us back a full shift. We're already chasing production targets." "I know." He stepped closer, practically shoving the glowing screen of his tablet in my face. A series of green graphs and charts filled the display. "Look, Eli, I trust the sensors. They take 1,000 readings a second, and they say everything is perfectly within normal parameters. Your ear is not more accurate than our billion-dollar monitoring system. We need to be producing, not chasing ghosts in the machine based on your gut feelings." I finally straightened up and looked at him. His face was smooth, unlined by the Texas sun or the worry that should come with a job like this. His eyes had the sharp, cold gleam of a man who sees this plant not as a living, breathing entity, but as a series of numbers on a spreadsheet. A place of inputs and outputs, profit and loss, where the 100 souls working inside were just another variable. "The primary flange on this line is showing stress patterns. Shouldn't have after only 6 months of service," I said, my voice low and even. "Either the parts Apex sourced are substandard, or someone is pushing the system past its operational limits when I'm not on watch. Or maybe, just maybe, the equipment is fine and you're being paranoid." Blake counted, a smug little smile playing on his lips. "I've been looking at your logs, you know. You file more precautionary maintenance reports than all the other Apex plants in Texas combined." I slid the listening device back into my tool belt. "Is that a problem?" "It is when it costs us uptime. And frankly, I have to wonder if it's because this plant has more issues, or if you're just creating paperwork to make your job seem important." A cold knot tightened in my gut, a feeling I knew all too well. It was the same feeling I'd had 10 years ago, a slow, creeping dread that tells you something is deeply, fundamentally wrong long before any alarm bell rings. It was the feeling I'd had the day my wife, Sarah, went to work in this very plant and never came home. "I'll have a formal report on your desk by the end of my shift," I said, my voice betraying none of the storm brewing inside me. I turned my back on him and went back to my inspection. "Make it quick," he snapped. "We have quotas to meet." I heard his footsteps retreat down the metal catwalk. The knot in my stomach pulled tighter, a cold, heavy anchor. I learned my trade the hard way on my feet with my hands. I joined the Army Corps of Engineers at 20, where they taught me how complex systems work, and more importantly, how they whisper before they scream. How they fail. After my 6 years of service, I came home to Texas and to Sarah. I took a job here at the Oak Creek plant. Back then, it felt like a good place, a solid company. But things change. 10 years ago, a pressure valve in Section B, where Sarah worked as a lab tech, ruptured. The official report called it a catastrophic, unforeseeable failure. It killed 3 people, including her. After that, safety became more than a job. It became a religion. I studied, I took night classes, I memorized every engineering schematic and safety protocol. I worked my way up from a line technician to the guy they trusted to keep the whole place from blowing itself off the map. I earned a reputation. Some of the younger guys, the ambitious ones, thought I was a dinosaur, a roadblock to efficiency. But the old hands, the ones who remembered the sound of the explosion that day, they understood. They knew I was protecting their lives, not just Apex's bottom line. My daughter, Chloe, never really got it. After her mother's death, a wall went up between us. She saw my obsession with this place as a betrayal of Sarah's memory. "Why do you keep going back there, Dad?" she'd ask, her voice filled with a pain I couldn't seem to heal. "You could get a desk job, be a consultant." But she didn't understand that I couldn't leave. I had to be here, with my eyes on the machines, my hands on the pipes. "You can't hear a hairline fracture from an office in Houston," I'd told her. She's grown now, living her own life a state away, and our calls are short and infrequent. I know she thinks I chose this place over her, over everything. Maybe she's right. Some men are built to be fathers, to be husbands. I was rebuilt for one purpose, to make sure no one else ever had to get the same phone call I did. 2 months before Blake Sutton arrived, the whispers started again. New parts would arrive with pristine certification papers, but the parts themselves lacked the official inspection stamps. Maintenance logs would be signed off, but the detailed work notes were missing. My supply orders for high-grade German steel valves were being quietly altered, replaced with cheaper, lower-spec alternatives from overseas. I took my concerns to my boss at the time, the old plant manager, Marcus Wallace. He was a good man, the man who had been my mentor. He had also been the plant manager on the day Sarah died. "It's budget cuts from corporate," Marcus had explained, his face a mask of weary resignation. "Apex is getting squeezed by shareholders, and they're squeezing us." "Marcus, these aren't the places to cut corners," I'd said, my voice tight. "We're talking about core reactor components." He just shook his head, the guilt still heavy in his eyes after all these years. "I know, Eli. I've fought them on it. They won't listen. They told me they're bringing in new leadership to optimize operations." That was the exact phrase they used. 2 weeks later, Marcus was gone. Apex offered him a generous early retirement package he couldn't refuse. At his farewell lunch in the break room, he pulled me aside. "Watch your back, Eli," he said, his voice a low whisper. "They don't want people who ask questions anymore. They want people who will sign the papers and look the other way." I just nodded. "I know." He gripped my shoulder, his knuckles white. "Document everything," he urged. "Every cheap part, every skip test. Build a file, Eli. Your own file. Don't trust their digital records. Make it physical. Make it real." I took his words to heart. In my small home office, I set up a makeshift darkroom. I started carrying my father's old 35mm film camera with me on my rounds. I didn't know then how vital those rolls of film, those tangible, unerasable images, would become. The day it all finally broke, I was running a diagnostic on the primary safety valve of the number 4 reactor. It's a massive piece of engineering, the final fail-safe designed to vent pressure and prevent a runaway thermal reaction. It was the last line of defense against the exact kind of failure that had taken my wife from me. My assistant, a young engineer named Leo Garcia, was helping me when I saw it. The pressure readings on the control panel were stable, green across the board. But when I checked the manual gauge on the valve itself, the needle was twitching, vibrating almost imperceptibly. And then I saw the sealant around the main gasket. It was weeping a tiny, almost invisible stream of hydraulic fluid. Contaminated fluid. I could see microscopic metal shavings glittering in the drip, a sure sign of grinding and internal wear. This was serviced last month, right? I asked Leo, keeping my voice calm, though I already knew what the digital log said. Yes, sir, he answered, a slight waver in his voice. While you were on your days off, Mr. Sutton signed off on the work order himself. A block of ice settled in my stomach. A plant manager signing off on a critical component service was not just unusual. It was a screaming red flag. Leo, go to the supply depot, I said quietly. Get me the physical inventory checkout sheet for this valve's last service. The paper copy, not the digital one. Leo hurried off, his face pale. He returned 20 minutes later holding a crumpled sheet of paper. One look was all it took. The part numbers didn't match the manufacturer's specs. They'd used cheap, unauthorized aftermarket seals. The kind of corner cutting that saves a company a few $1,000s, but could cost hundreds of lives and poison the Texas coastline for a generation. I took out my old camera. The click of the shutter felt unnaturally loud in the hum of the plant. I added the photo to the secret collection I'd been building for months. Then I walked to the control room and initiated a full shutdown of the reactor for emergency inspection. It took less than an hour for Blake to find me. He stormed into the control room, his face flushed with anger. What in the hell do you think you're doing, Cole? He demanded. We are in the middle of a production cycle. The primary safety valve on reactor 4 is compromised, I stated, my voice level. It needs to be completely disassembled, the faulty parts replaced, and the whole system recertified. He actually laughed, a short, ugly bark. It was just serviced. I signed off on it myself. Yeah, I said, meeting his gaze. That's a big part of the problem. The color drained from his face, replaced by a dark, dangerous flush. What is that supposed to mean? It means whoever did that service used non-spec, substandard parts. And it means whoever signed off on that work either had no idea what they were looking at, or they just didn't give a damn. The handful of other operators in the control room fell silent, their eyes wide, watching the confrontation. You're done, Cole, Blake hissed, his voice dropping to a low snarl. Get your personal items. You're finished. Security will escort you from the premises. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I turned to Leo, who looked like he was about to be sick, and handed him my inspection kit. Full workup, I said to him, my voice firm. Record everything you find on paper. Blake followed me as I walked toward the lockers, his voice dripping with contempt. You think you're untouchable because you've been here since the dinosaurs roamed the earth, but you're just a relic. You're a liability. We have targets to hit, profits to make for our shareholders. Your obsessive, paranoid fantasies about safety are costing this company a fortune. I stopped at the door and turned to face him one last time. You want to know what really costs a fortune, Mr. Sutton? I asked quietly. Funerals, lawsuits, environmental disaster cleanups that last for decades. He jabbed a finger toward my chest. You're fired for gross insubordination and deliberate disruption of operations. Effective immediately. There will be no severance. I just nodded slowly, then turned and walked to my locker to pack my bag. As I stuffed my worn coveralls and a few personal effects into my duffel, a strange sense of calm washed over me. This was always going to happen. It was inevitable from the day Blake Sutton walked through the gates with his spreadsheet and his smile. Apex Chemical wanted to squeeze every last drop of profit from this plant, and Blake was the tool they'd sent to do it, designed to crush anything that stood in his way, especially old-fashioned safety rules. But they had made one colossal miscalculation. They thought I was just a stubborn old man, a ghost of the past haunting their shiny, new, efficient operation. They had no idea what I'd really been doing for the last 2 months. They had no idea about the box of negatives hidden in the bottom drawer of my desk at home, right beneath the framed photo of my smiling wife. The long drive back to my small house in Freeport was silent. For the first time in a decade, my mind wasn't churning with pressure calculations, maintenance schedules, or the hum of the machinery. I was thinking about my next move. The house felt hollow when I walked in, carrying the scent of dust and stillness. I had just come off an extended shift, and now, suddenly, there was nothing. No job to go back to. No purpose. I took a long shower, letting the hot water wash away the grime of the plant, but not the cold weight in my chest. I didn't bother with dinner. I just went to my office and opened the laptop. First, I scanned every single photograph I had taken, every handwritten note, every damning document, and backed them up to a secure external drive. Then, I composed an email. It was addressed to the Human Resources Department at Apex Chemical Industries. This letter serves as a formal whistleblower complaint regarding dangerously unsafe working conditions and the deliberate, systematic violation of federal safety protocols at the Oak Creek plant. I have meticulously documented dozens of instances where critical safety equipment has been improperly serviced with non-spec parts. Mandatory inspection protocols have been bypassed, and legitimate safety concerns have been willfully ignored by plant management. I attached a file containing over 30 pages of documentation, complete with dates, specific regulatory violations, and the high-resolution scans of my photographs. Then I clicked send, and I went to bed and slept for the first time in weeks. It took 3 days to get a response. It didn't come from HR. It came from a man named Philip Gray, Apex Chemicals' chief legal officer. The email was a masterpiece of corporate stonewalling, brief, professional, and designed to kill my complaint in its cradle. Mr. Cole, Apex has received your email and conducted a thorough internal review of your allegations. Our findings indicate that all operations at the Oak Creek plant are, and have been, conducted well within all acceptable corporate and federal safety parameters. Your termination was the result of documented performance issues, including insubordination and creating unnecessary production delays. Be advised that any further communication containing these or other unfounded accusations against Apex Chemical Industries or its employees may result in legal action for defamation. Sincerely, Philip Gray, Chief Legal Officer. I read the message twice, then slowly closed my laptop. A part of me, the naive part I thought had died with Sarah, had actually hoped they might listen. Stupid! The next morning, I made 2 phone calls. My first was to a former colleague who now ran his own consulting firm, Summit Safety Solutions. We met for lunch at a small cafe near the water. Apex has been bleeding its safety budget for over a year, he told me, stirring his iced tea. It's not just Oak Creek. It's happening at all their facilities. They're under immense pressure from Wall Street after their last earnings call. The stock is in a nosedive. They're going to get people killed, I said, my voice barely a whisper. He nodded grimly. It's not a matter of if, but when. But until there's an incident, no one will do a thing. He leaned in, lowering his voice. Look, Eli, I might have a spot for you here at Summit. A senior consultant role. It's not what you were doing, but it's a steady paycheck. Thanks, I said, my mind elsewhere. But I need to see this through first. My second call was to the regional office of the Chemical Safety Board, the CSB, in Houston. I had been filing routine reports with them for years, but this was different. This was a warning. The receptionist, who answered, was polite but distant. She transferred me to a junior investigator, who then transferred me to his supervisor. I got about 30 seconds into my story before he cut me off. Mr. Cole, I understand your concern, the man said, his voice weary and bureaucratic. But we cannot launch a full-scale investigation based on the word of a recently terminated employee. It sounds like a personal dispute. I have evidence, I insisted. Photographs. Documents. 2 months' worth of it. Sir, we get hundreds of these kinds of complaints every year, he sighed. Most of them are from disgruntled workers looking for revenge. The Oak Creek plant has a scheduled inspection in 6 months. If there are any issues, our team will identify them at that time. 6 months might be too late, I said, a cold dread creeping up my spine. I appreciate your passion, Mr. Cole, but we have procedures. Good day. The line went dead. I sat there in the silence of my empty house, the phone still pressed to my ear. I could feel the immense weight of what I was truly up against. A multi-billion-dollar corporation with an army of lawyers, a government agency buried under its own red tape, and me. Just one old man with a box of photographs that nobody in a position of power wanted to look at. Not until they were forced to. 2 weeks after I was fired, I was methodically organizing my evidence, preparing to send it to every journalist I could find, when my phone rang. It was Leo Garcia. It was his first day off since I'd been forced out. Eli, he said. His voice was a hushed, nervous whisper. It's bad. It's gotten really bad out here. We met at a dimly lit diner on the far side of town, a place no Apex employee would ever go. Leo looked exhausted. There were dark, heavy circles under his eyes, and he kept glancing nervously toward the door. He slid his phone across the worn Formica tabletop. He's pushed production up by another 20%, Leo said, his voice trembling slightly. He's running the reactors at their absolute maximum temperature thresholds around the clock. The constant thermal stress is causing microfractures in the coolant lines. The whole place. It shudders now. I picked up his phone. Does Blake know? Leo gave a short, bitter laugh. He calls it acceptable operational stress, but Eli. He leaned forward, his eyes wide with fear. Last week, we had a temperature spike in Reactor 2. It almost triggered a scram, a full emergency shutdown. Instead of finding the cause, Blake had a tech come in and dial back the sensitivity on the alarm system. My jaw tightened so hard I felt a muscle jump in my cheek. That was not just negligence. That was criminal. Is anyone else pushing back? Are you kidding? Leo whispered. I've got student loans up to my eyeballs. The other guys have kids, mortgages. Everyone's terrified of getting fired and blacklisted. He stared down into his untouched cup of coffee. There's something else, he said, his voice barely audible. I had to drop off some reports in his office. His computer was unlocked. He had an email open. It was from someone high up at corporate. A whole list of cost-saving directives. What maintenance schedules to skip. What safety inspections to fast-track. This isn't just Blake, Eli. This is coming from the top. That night, I couldn't sleep. Leo's words echoed in my head. This wasn't just one reckless manager. It was a corporate culture of rot. A cancer that started in the boardroom and was metastasizing through the heart of the plant. Then I looked at the files Leo had managed to copy from the system before he left. Forged inspection reports. Altered pressure readings. But the most damning piece of evidence was something else. It was a video. A short, grainy clip Leo had secretly recorded on his phone from the back of the control room. It showed Blake Sutton, clear as day, standing over a technician's shoulder. This damn alarm is too sensitive, Blake's voice said, sharp and annoyed. It's costing us productivity. Turn the sensitivity down by half. If anything happens, the blame is on me. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. This was it. This was the key. I couldn't go back to the CSB with just my word against a corporate giant. But with this video, I had something they couldn't dismiss as the ramblings of a disgruntled employee. I had proof. I had a smoking gun. The next morning, I drove the hour to Houston to the regional headquarters of the CSB. I hadn't called ahead this time. I walked in and asked to see a senior investigator. After a 45-minute wait, I was shown into the office of a woman named Eva Ross. She had sharp eyes and a no-nonsense air about her. Unlike the man on the phone, she didn't interrupt. She listened to my entire story, her expression unreadable. Then I handed her my binder of neatly organized documents and photographs. I watched her examine every page, her eyes lingering on the photos of the corroded valves and cracked welds. Finally, I placed Leo's phone on her desk and played the video. She watched it once. Then she watched it again, her lips pressed into a thin, hard line. "This is deeply disturbing, Mr. Cole," she said finally, her voice low and serious, "especially considering Apex Chemicals' recent history." "Their history?" I asked. She met my gaze, a silent question in her eyes. Then she turned her computer monitor toward me. On the screen was the CSB's internal compliance database for Apex Chemical Industries. It was a sea of red flags. Dozens of violations across their facilities over the last few years. Most were settled with small fines, nothing ever made public. "They've been on our watch list for a while," Ms. Ross explained. "But they're smart, or they think they are. They spread the incidents out. A small chemical spill here, a minor safety breach there. Never enough in one place at one time to trigger a full-blown federal investigation." Her finger traced down a list of facilities until it stopped at one. "Oak Creek Plant." "Until now, perhaps," she said softly. I stared at the screen, at the long list of lies and near misses. A cold, quiet rage began to build inside me. This wasn't just about saving money. This was a calculated, cynical game they were playing with people's lives. They knew exactly how close to the edge they could get without falling off, and they had been dancing on that razor's edge for years. The same edge from which my wife had fallen. "They fired me for doing my job," I said, my voice thick with emotion I didn't try to hide. "For trying to stop them from killing someone else." Ms. Ross closed the file and folded her hands on her desk. "Mr. Cole, I need to be perfectly clear with you," she said, her gaze steady and intense. "If we move forward with this, Apex will come after you with everything they have. Their legal team is legendary. They have limitless resources. They will try to destroy your reputation. They will paint you as incompetent, a liar, a man with a grudge. They may even claim you fabricated this evidence." I met her gaze without flinching. "I have nothing to hide. 30 years in this industry, a spotless record, and a very personal reason to see this through." She gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "Good, because I'm going to need you to go on the record. Formal depositions, sworn statements. It could go all the way to a congressional hearing." "Whatever it takes," I said. "This is a slow process," she warned. "We can't just storm the gates tomorrow." "I understand," I replied, the image of Leo's terrified face flashing in my mind. But the men and women working in that plant, they're living on borrowed time. For the next 3 weeks, I was in constant contact with Ms. Ross and her team at the CSB. I became their technical advisor, walking them through every photograph, explaining the engineering principles behind each violation, and helping them build a cumulative picture of the catastrophic risk that was growing at the Oak Creek plant. I stayed in touch with Leo, who fed me quiet updates. The situation was deteriorating. 2 more near misses with the coolant systems. Blake was pushing the crews to the breaking point, demanding they cut even more corners to make up for lost time. "Half the guys on my shift are looking for jobs elsewhere," Leo told me in a hushed phone call. "But they're scared. Apex is a big company. They can make sure you never work in this state again." "Tell them to be patient," I said, repeating the words Ms. Ross had told me. "And tell them to write everything down." Ms. Ross had laid out the strategy. First, a surprise routine inspection. It would be limited in scope, but it would get their team inside the plant. Based on what they find, we can legally justify expanding it into a full, top-to-bottom investigation, she explained. "We have to build this case brick by brick. Make it airtight. Apex has beaten us in court before when we've cut corners." I understood the legal dance, the bureaucratic necessity of it all. But every day of waiting felt like a lifetime, knowing the ticking time bomb out at the plant. Then, Ms. Ross called with an update and a complication. "We've scheduled the initial inspection for next Tuesday," she said. "But we have a problem. Someone from Apex's legal department made an informal inquiry to our director. They know something is coming. They'll try to hide everything," I said, a knot of frustration tightening in my chest. "They'll do a massive cleanup. I'm counting on it," she replied, a hint of steel in her voice. "Which is why I'm adjusting my plan. The lead inspector I'm sending in is one of our best. He's a regulatory specialist, but he's also a PhD in chemical engineering. He'll know exactly what to look for, even if they've put a fresh coat of paint on it." The night before the inspection, I couldn't sleep. I paced the floors of my small house, my phone clutched in my hand, waiting for a text from Leo. Around 1 a.m., it buzzed. "Sutton has everyone on mandatory overtime. Maintenance crews are everywhere. It's all cosmetic. They're not fixing the real problems, just hiding them." I forwarded the message to Ms. Ross. Her reply came back in seconds. "As expected, my team is ready." The CSB inspection team arrived at the Oak Creek plant at 7 a.m. Tuesday morning. By law, I wasn't allowed anywhere near the facility or to have any contact with the team during their review. I spent the day in a small, windowless conference room at the CSB office in Houston waiting. The hours crawled by. The team was scheduled to be back by 3 p.m. At 4:30, there was still no sign of them. My phone vibrated in my pocket. A text from an unknown number. "Reactor 4 valve failed pressure test. Inspector is expanding review to all systems. Sutton is losing his mind." It had to be from Leo or one of the other guys on the crew who had finally found their courage. I showed the text to Ms. Ross. She nodded, a grim look on her face. "That's Dr. Albright's specialty. Reactor pressure systems. If he's expanding the review on site, it means he found something major." At 6:12 p.m., the phone on the conference room table rang. It was Ms. Ross's direct line. She picked it up, listening intently for several long minutes, her face giving nothing away. I held my breath, studying her expression for any clue. When she finally hung up, she turned to me. A look of grim, profound satisfaction was etched on her face. "They found enough for an immediate Level 3 intervention," she said. "Multiple, willful, serious violations, including the compromised reactor safety valve you flagged from the beginning. Dr. Albright's preliminary analysis said it would have failed completely under real emergency conditions. A full-blown meltdown." "What happens now?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "As of 7 a.m. tomorrow, we are issuing a mandatory shutdown of all operations at the Oak Creek plant," she said, her voice ringing with authority. "Full federal regulatory intervention. Every pipe will be scoped, every log audited, every single component tested." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding for 10 years. "And Blake Sutton?" Dr. Albright reported that he was uncooperative and belligerent throughout the inspection. He attempted to physically block them from accessing certain control systems, claiming they were proprietary. That kind of interference with a federal investigation automatically triggers a criminal referral. She began gathering her papers, her movements crisp and efficient. "This is just the start, Eli," she said. "Once we really start digging, I have a feeling we're going to find this rock goes all the way to the top." I nodded, a wave of emotions washing over me: vindication, relief, and a strange, hollow emptiness. The war wasn't over. It was just entering a new, more public phase. But for the first time since Sarah's death, I felt like I had finally done what I was meant to do. I had kept my promise. I had protected the people inside that plant, even when their own company wouldn't. The full federal intervention at the Oak Creek plant was a 4-week earthquake that sent shockwaves through the entire chemical industry. Every day unearthed a new layer of deceit. Falsified safety logs, years of using substandard parts, intentionally disabled warning alarms, and a pattern of unauthorized modifications to critical reactor systems. The final report from the CSB documented over 78 distinct and serious violations. It was a record for a single facility. I was brought into the CSB offices almost daily, providing technical explanations and context for the mountain of evidence they had uncovered. Each time I walked through their doors, I would pass the grim-faced lawyers from Apex Chemical huddled in the hallways, their expensive suits looking more crumpled each day. I saw Blake Sutton there twice, sitting alone in a waiting area. He looked shrunken, defeated. He refused to meet my eyes. Ms. Ross kept me apprised of the fallout. We've levied daily fines of over $1 million for as long as the plant remains non-compliant, she told me during one of our meetings. And based on emails we uncovered on their servers, we've now expanded the investigation to 3 other Apex facilities. The story broke in the trade journals first, then exploded into the national news. Safety scandal shuts down major Texas chemical plant. Apex stock didn't just plunge, it cratered. Investors fled, terrified of the massive liabilities and the specter of a federal investigation spreading across the company's entire North American operations. Then came the formal hearing before a special congressional subcommittee in Washington, D.C. The room was a cavern of polished wood and bright television lights, packed with government officials, industry lobbyists, and reporters. I sat in the back row, a ghost in a borrowed suit, and watched as Eva Ross and her team laid out their case. They projected my photographs onto massive screens, the cracked welds, the corroded valves, the weeping gaskets. The images were stark, undeniable. Then they played Leo's video. The grainy footage of Blake Sutton ordering a technician to disable a safety alarm filled the silent room. When it was over, the subcommittee's chairman leaned into his microphone. "Ms. Ross," he asked, his voice heavy with disbelief, "where did you obtain this recording?" Ms. Ross looked across the room, her eyes finding mine for a brief second. "It was provided by a plant employee, Mr. Chairman," she answered, her voice clear and strong. A young engineer who was gravely concerned for the safety of his colleagues. He was one of several employees who bravely came forward with evidence, at great personal risk. Across the room, Blake Sutton, seated with the Apex legal team, turned his head slowly. His eyes finally found me. The last bit of color drained from his face as the full weight of understanding crashed down on him. He began whispering frantically to the lawyer beside him, who simply closed his eyes and shook his head. It was over. It was all over. The subcommittee's findings were swift and brutal. They recommended the maximum possible fines on every single violation. They mandated a complete, federally supervised overhaul of all safety systems at the plant. And they issued a formal criminal referral to the Department of Justice for Blake Sutton and 2 senior executives at Apex headquarters for conspiracy and reckless endangerment. The Oak Creek plant would remain closed indefinitely. 3 months after the hearing, I stood in a bright, modern training room at the headquarters of Summit Safety Solutions. The morning sun streamed through the large windows, illuminating a group of about 20 young engineers, fresh-faced and eager. They were the first class of trainees for my new division. My division. After the Apex scandal made national headlines, the job offers had poured in. But the offer from Summit's CEO, my old colleague, was the one that mattered. He didn't just want to hire me. He wanted me to build something new. He asked me to create an entirely new safety and compliance division from the ground up with me as its director. I would have complete authority over everything: inspection protocols, training, maintenance standards. The entire industry is terrified, he had told me. No one wants to be the next Apex. We're going to turn safety from a line item on a budget into our biggest selling point. I accepted the job on one condition: I got to build my own team. Leo Garcia was the first person I hired. He was followed by 4 other technicians from the Oak Creek plant, the ones who had quietly gathered documents and supported me from the shadows. The trainees settled into their seats, and I walked to the front of the room. I didn't have a PowerPoint presentation or a fancy slide deck. I just had the truth. "Good morning," My name is Eli Cole. For 30 years, I've worked inside chemical plants. I've seen good ones, and I've seen bad ones. I've learned that the difference between the two usually isn't about the technology or the equipment. It's about people. People who are willing to listen when a machine is telling them something is wrong, and people who have the courage to speak up. I saw a flicker of recognition on some of their faces. They'd all read the stories about the Apex scandal, about the whistleblower who had brought a corporate giant to its knees. Blake Sutton was sentenced to 2 years in federal prison, I continued, my voice even. Apex Chemical paid nearly $250 million in fines and remediation costs. The Oak Creek plant still hasn't reopened. All of that happened because a handful of executives in a boardroom decided that safety protocols were just obstacles to profit. I looked at each of them, meeting their eyes one by one. In this line of work, there is no such thing as a small mistake. There is no such thing as an acceptable risk. You are the last line of defense for yourself, for your crew, for every family that lives downwind from a facility like this. Never forget that. Then, I clicked a remote. The screen behind me lit up, but it wasn't with a graph or a chart. It was an old, slightly faded color photograph. A picture of my wife, Sarah, smiling, her arm around a younger version of me, standing in front of the gates of the Oak Creek plant on my first day of work there, 26 years ago. This is my wife, Sarah, I said softly. She was killed in that plant 10 years ago by what the company called an unforeseeable failure. A failure that was caused by a small deviation from a safety protocol, a tiny detail that someone decided wasn't important. Our job, the only job that matters, is to make sure no one ever loses a person they love because of a detail someone decided to ignore. That is all you need to remember. As I finished speaking, I felt a weight I hadn't even known I was carrying finally begin to lift. Not the weight of responsibility that I would carry forever willingly. It was the weight of fighting alone. Now I had a crew. I had a mission. And I had the power to make sure it mattered. Later that evening, after the trainees had gone home, I sat at my new desk. I took out a pen and a clean sheet of paper. For the first time in years, I began to write a letter to my daughter. It was a start.